Welcome everyone to the first session of the International Society for Ecological Economics Doing Ecological Economics seminar. We are very happy to be here. We are very happy to have you. So the aim of the Doing Ecological Economics seminar that starts today is to share experience of academic and non-academic practitioners of ecological economics to discuss ways to improve the scope, the influence, the reach, the impact, the policy and societal relevance of ecological economics. So you're very welcome to send us ideas of potential topic that you would like to see discussed in this webinar series. You're also very welcome to volunteer, to come and to speak in this webinar if you want to. So before we start with today's seminar, I would already like to announce the next one. It will happen on April 13, and it will be on the topic of ecological economics in decision makings in private corporations and international climate policy. So today's topic is about ecological economics, labor unions, and the future of work. So it's quite important and dense topic. We will try to go through it in 1 hour. We have two panel speakers to talk about it with us today, Olivier Malay and Halliki Kreinin. So Olivier has a PhD in economics from the Catholic University of Leuven with a focus on post-growth, and Olivier now works as an economist for a union in Belgium. And Halliki, she has a PhD in socioeconomics from the Institute for Ecological Economics of the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And Halliki is now a postdoc at the University of Münster. As of me, my name is Louison Cahen-Fourot. I am an assistant professor in economics at the Department for Social Science and Business at Roskilde University in Denmark, and I will be facilitating today's seminar. I would also like to thank very much Roldan Muradian, who is the president of the International Society for Ecological Economics and who is acting in the backstage as a technical support to this webinar. So this event is a conversation. It's meant to be interactive. So please don't be shy and ask your questions in the chat. And Roldan and I, we will relay them to Halliki and Olivier, and that will be the basis for the discussion. All right, so thanks a lot, Halliki and Olivier, for being with us today. We're very happy to have you as our first ever guest in this webinar series. And maybe to kickstart the discussion, it would be interesting for us to know about your experience working with labor unions and working on the topic of the future of work in the context of ecological economics or in the context of the social ecological transformation. Who wants to start? All right. Olivier, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. So my work at the union is to I do a lot of stuff, but one in particular is to go to businesses to read the financial accounts of businesses and to explain them to workers. And this gives a lot of debates about a lot of issues, financial issues, but not only about everything, including ecological issues. But one thing that is surprising is that when we talk about the future of work, it's not the same when we talk about it with ecological economics or at the union level. At the union level, when we talk about the future of work, it's mainly dark and complicated. It's about new form of contracts that are of low quality. It's about more flexibility for the workers, or it is about reducing the labor conditions in order to avoid a loss of competitiveness or stuff like that. While when we talk about it in an ecological economic framework, I think it's more about how can we reinvent work linked to automation and stuff like that. But on the field, it's not the questions we do ask because it's a bit far of the daily preoccupations. and we are more on a defensive stance. So how do we struggle against the current degradation of labor rights? And this occupies 100% of the scope. And sometimes we think about further issues, but then it's the club of intellectuals of the union who talks about them, but not the core of the union. I include there the workers or the sectoral negotiators.
All right, thanks a lot. We will discuss more about all of this in the discussion. So Halliki, would you like to tell us a bit more about your own experience as a practitioner of ecological economics working on those issues as well?
Yeah, thanks, Louison. Also, thanks for inviting me to be here. It's very nice to meet you, Olivier, as well. So I am a trade unionist, and I was also a trade union young members organizer before I kind of went back to research. And since then, I have mostly actually been a researcher of trade unions and trade union environmental policy, and also a researcher of sustainable work and the sort of socio-ecological transformation of work as well. And of course, I would agree with what Olivier has said as well. There's two different conversations going on. On the one hand, there's this ecological economics conversation, which has been going since the 90s, about the need, for example, to reduce working times, to reduce production, to reduce work as a whole. Also in terms of not just the environmental impacts of work, but also the social impacts of work, also how work is divided in society, the sort of gender differentiation of how work is done. I think unpaid work is also a huge discussion in ecological economics, especially sort of unpaid ecological work, actually. But this is very separate then from the discussions that go on the trade union level, which I think, which you would also expect have more to do with what has been happening in work, to do with neoliberalism, for example. Also, increasingly precarious working conditions, the sort of Uberization of work, and so on. And I think trade unions are very much overwhelmed with these multiple short-term crises. Also not helped at all by the Corona crisis as well, the worsening living conditions and so on. And of course, this means that there's maybe less space overall for people to think about these long-term crises and the fact that work needs to fundamentally change and how we organize work needs to fundamentally change. So yes, that's quite removed from these other topics, I would say. So I think trade unions are talking more about the future of work, and it's always digitalization and sustainability together. And I would say that much more emphasis is put on this first part, and maybe a bit naively also about what technology and digitalization actually offers, and also the environmental impacts of technology. So unfortunately, I think the debate is being taken up only in academics or academia mostly. I don't know if Olivier agrees with this.
Thanks, Halliki. Olivier, before you jumped in again, I just want to remind, in case some people joined us a bit later, this is a conversation, so please don't be shy. And if you have any questions or remark, please ask them in the chat, and I will then relay them to Halliki and Olivier so we can discuss them all together. So please, everyone who now watch the seminar through YouTube, ask any question or remark that you would like to. So you both pointed out to this kind of a bit maybe divergence in the kind of discussions that are going on in ecological economics and in labor unions, right? And so my immediate question for you then, before going a bit more in details, would be like, do labor unions know about ecological economics in general? What is your impression or your experience with this?
I think they do not know anything about ecological economics, but it's not just about ecological economics. I think in the union, you know, mainstream economics, and it's liberal economics, but you don't know even neoclassical economics. It's too technical. then you know Keynes and you know Marx, but you don't know their economic theory. You know what are their political conclusions, and that's what is discussed in the unions or with the employers. But people don't know ecological economists, and they unfortunately often also don't know anything about economics. When I arrived, I was it was a surprise for me that nobody never questioned my economic analysis. I did my PhD in ecological economics, so I'm not a neoclassical guy or so, but I expected people to question me about why do you say what you say? It's no, never. So there is a lack of economic understanding, and so ecological economics is again a step too far. But there is a good reception of the speeches within the ecological economics discourse, but people don't know consciously about it. But I think if you can frame the propositions in a meaningful way for people, like very concrete, linked to what people live, it can have a huge impact.
Halliki, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, broaden the discussion. So I think ecological economics, so what do we mean by that? Do we mean an understanding of, for example, environmental science and the interaction between environment and economy? So if we just even mean this very basic kind of relation, not even ecological economics per se, I think there is a huge lack of understanding also of these topics. But I think that in itself, because if we take a step back, one more step back, in general, I think there is a problem with how unions perceive themselves, also, which makes sense again since the 1970s and kind of neoliberalism and the sort of reduced role that unions have as business mediators in an increasingly hostile environment. And I mean specifically in the UK now. I think there's been a loss in general of this wider role of unions, for example, in educating or in or being a space for discussion on topics, right? And I think that's also, again, it's very different, I think, depending on which country you're in and which union we're talking about. But there has been this pressure from business also to force unions into a very neoliberal role. So I think there's been less space for that. And I think if unions see themselves as kind of these mediators between business and the workers, I think it's very difficult for them to maybe take up these bigger roles that we need unions to take up for social ecological transformation. But yeah, in general, I think there's little engagement with environmental topics. And when it does exist, and again, it's different for different unions, it's hard to make generalizations. But when it does exist, it's typically in line rather with this green business and green capitalism, and sort of more naive technological optimism, because I think unions, have not yet been able to create a sort of progressive vision also of what is possible. And I think that's where ecological economics would be quite useful, to engage with.
So if I understood correctly what you said, like there is a lack of penetration of ecological economics or even of economics in general, according to Olivier said, within the way union perceive their role and the way they think about future evolution. But Olivier, in your first word, you kind of pointed out to say that like the intellectual club, as you said, of the union is actually interested in this kind of thing, but it doesn't really feel to the base of the union. So, like, how would you explain that? And do you think that is already a first step, or why do you think would be relevant to increase the reach of ecological economics within trade unions, not only to the intellectual club as you named them, but also to just common members of trade unions?
So for me, we should distinguish unions in the unions. It's a very big organization. In Belgium, we represent 1.6 million people. So we have tons of employees. And among them, you have people who work in the study department or other more intellectual functions. People who went to university, who have received training in environmental science, even people who are paid to foster a green agenda within the union. So these people are very aware about ecological issues and have very good positions about it. The problem is that these people are often occupy technical positions or support positions. But then you have the core business of the union, which is the workers, which is the business negotiations and the sectoral negotiations. And there it's it's far more, I don't know how to say it, but it's far more linked to the daily life of workers. So you will talk about someone has been fired there, or we need a wage increase because we don't earn enough money, or we need more healthcare measures. And there it's very hard to come by with the environmental discourse. For me, the reason is that we don't frame the environmental discourse the right way. We talk about very macro stuff, something that is very far from the people. We say, for instance, degrowth. We talk about degrowth, but for someone who works in a factory, even economic growth, it's an abstract concept. People in the businesses, they don't know anything about economic growth, and it's right that they don't know anything because they didn't study economics. But we cannot come with them with the discourse, we should stop pursuing growth, change the indicators. They don't know what is growth, they don't know what is an indicator. What we should come by with is proposition. For instance, your business pollutes, and people know where the pollution in the business is, and they know the businesses, they know the production processes. How would we change your production process? How do you see that we change the mobility within your business? So with a more concrete and direct approach, with what makes sense for people, there you could have a very big room within the union to make changes. So this is at the business level, but this could be also at the sectoral level. So I work for the trade, the retail sector, and there you have many negotiations at the retail level, but there are no propositions to green this sector. Only the businesses come with sometimes propositions, but at the union level, we don't have any expertise to how to green a sector. And even within ecological economics, I never saw any propositions to green a sector or to help me to say we should have new investments, we should insulate the buildings of the shops, or we should change the mobility, or even degrowth stuffs, but applied to the concrete reality, not at the global level. So I'm sure there are some studies who worked on that, and probably more in the business literature, but the link between that and a union man is not made. And I don't know who should do this link, but there is room for a lot of changes there.
So maybe we can discuss that later, because that's an important point. But we have a first question in the chat, coming back to the issue of perceptions of unions, and the question is from Katarzyna Gruszka, a colleague from the Institute for Ecological Economics in Vienna. And the question is the following: so unions have an issue with self-perception, but what about the perception on unions? Any realistic chance for dropping the idea of seeing unions as fossilized institution? Pardon my language, I think that's because of the use of the word fossilized. So it's true that unions have sometimes are badly perceived in the rest of society, and are sometimes perceived as organization of the past, and how that may hinder their role in a possible social ecological transformation.
Yeah, so I would say actually unions are doing a lot, or again, it depends. But I think many unions are trying to engage more also with young people. And taking up environmental concerns is actually one way that I think unions like IG Metall have been quite successful in recruiting a lot of young members. And I think they're actually one of the few unions that they're going up in membership, right? So I think certainly there's and then there's the IG BCE in Germany, which is a very, very different union and which has opposite strategies to IG Metall, for example. So I would argue that taking up environmental concerns and this bigger fight for society and for the climate crisis can be a way for unions to recruit young members and also to kind of change how they're perceived in society. I don't know, Olivier, what is your union doing to drop its fossilized image?
I think the way we could change this, there's only one way. It's start to have again victories on any issues. But unions lose on every point, everywhere in Europe and in the world. Maybe not in the world, but we should start winning. And what is the best battlefield where we could win? Is ecology one of these battlefields? I don't know, and I'm not sure, but we should try. But what I think is that union could say we are green or we are for post-growth. They would say it and they would just say it. It wouldn't change anything. It would be as if an NGO speaks. The core strength of the union is its presence in the businesses. In Belgium, we have a presence in all medium and big businesses. Tomorrow, we can put them off if we want. So if we use this power to make a green transition, it could have a huge impact, and it could hugely change the bad picture of union. But the way is how we make that the workers on the ground want to make this change. So how do we approach them with words and methodologies that they understand and they like? That's for me the big question.
But so, yeah, Halliki.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, do you think that's, I think that's part of the problem. Of course, I agree with you that unions themselves cannot change the system. And this is, I think, constantly the problem that we're running into, that there's this huge kind of economic societal transformation that we need, fundamentally change how work is organized, right? And what we produce, what we consume, and so on. And then there is where we are at the moment. And with sort of the passing of every year, we don't get that much closer to this goal that we know we need. The window of opportunity to avoid hothouse Earth, the ever warming of the planet once we go past 1.5 degrees, for example, that window is constantly closing and closing, and we are not getting any closer to it, right? And I think part of the problem for me is, and again, I agree that trade unions by themselves, of course, are not responsible for production, and it's great that they're in the business. But we, we need much more change than just green transitions, right? Than just changing light bulbs. We need to shut down whole sectors, radically transform other sectors, and I think there is this, there's a dilemma for many unions there that I don't think it's so easy to overcome. And in general, of course, we see this with, for example, again with IG BCE, who are fighting for workers in the fossil sector and who are taking up the narrative of sort of coal mining industry in Germany to go against environmental movements, right, for their workers. And they also talk about green transitions. So yes, I mean, it's a very complicated and difficult question. And again, I think there's this problem of how do we get to this much bigger change when we are locked in this system where you have welfare, if you have a job, your family's security, your family's welfare is based on this job, and there might be nothing for you. And how do we get from this place of fear and so on to this transformation? And I don't know.
But certainly, unions could have a role in overcoming this fear, as you mentioned, Halliki. But then maybe we can come back to before going further. Maybe we can come back to what you said about the issue of the perception of union, because if I understood correctly what you said, you argued that with the neoliberalization of capitalism, and in particular the emergence of finance-led and globalized capitalism, the unions tried on the one side to protect as they could the interest of the working class, but also kind of shifted to a role of a bit disciplining the working class instead of being a transformative force themselves. I don't know if you would agree with this statement, but therefore, if I understand correctly, what you both say is that we need unions to come back to a more transformative stance, where they would kind of mobilize their base to be themselves a transformative agent. And because I think Olivier, you said it quite clearly, you know, if you come with proposal to depollute some business, for instance, well, who knows better where the pollution come from in the plants than the workers themselves, right? So is there here, do you think, like a work to be done in relation to ecological economics, for instance, to come back to a more transformative agenda that could also help transition in all sectors? And transition might mean, as you said, Halliki, shutting down some sectors. Like my question essentially is whether ecological economics could have any relevance or be of any help to come back to a more transformative agenda rather than a disciplining agenda. Halliki?
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree. I think also what we found out is that the membership tends to be much more radical than union bureaucracy on many issues. So I think this is where your point about the disciplining apparatus of unions is certainly echoed to some extent. So yeah, but I think we also exist in this sort of post-political space where it's much harder to mobilize workers. And I think this framing of the environmental crisis question is key also from Olivier. So I think if you can frame it maybe as an issue of, we need to frame it much more as an issue of welfare, that, and not as this abstract issue of polar bears and so on, which would maybe make it, which should make it easier to mobilize around. But then we have the bureaucracy, which might not want mobilization because it had its own interests. But I like the ETUI framing of the eco-social contract as this. I go on and on about this all the time, but this new framing of trying to fit the environmental crisis as a security issue to the welfare of workers, which it is obviously, and to have a positive narrative of what a social contract was, but a new eco-social contract, and focusing then on meeting different needs. And I think that's maybe one narrative. But of course, we also talk about this, we've been talking about this also for 20 years, mobilizing workers and mobilizing for social ecological transformation. And I wonder how that could come about.
Yeah, and probably we're not done talking about it. So just to make everyone at par, the EUTI is the European Trade Union Institute, right? That's correct, Halliki? Great. So Olivier, since you're a member of the bureaucracy of a union, maybe you have a comment on that as well.
In Belgium, a lot of workers are unionized, so more than 60%, which means that the workers of the union are not necessarily radical. They are like everybody in the society, not more radical, not less. And the bureaucracy depends. There is also everything in the bureaucracy. You have a left wing, you have a right wing, and you have a class struggle between these two wings. So union is an institution like everywhere, where you have a lot of differences within the inside. But in our union, we started a process of called organizing, which is based on the work of Saul Alinsky, the sociologist, where the idea is you go back to the basics, you go back to the workers, and you organize them on issues they master, and you empower them while fighting for these issues. So this is the way we see how we could reinvigorate unions and make them a strength of proposition and of empowerment, and not a restrictive strength which limits the workers or something like that. So, and when you do this organizing process, or you take social issues, but you also can take ecological issues. The point is you have to take something that speaks to the workers and that they choose themselves. So if they are more concerned by social issues, you will only have social issues, but it's not the fault of the problem of the union. It's more that within the population, the ecological issues are not so developed. But I think within the union, there will be no problem to, and there is no problem to talk about environmental issues, because the workers also like them. It's more that it's not in the culture to put these things forward, and that can be changed. But I think the main stuff is that today the unions are sleepy, and we have to awake them, and we need new organizing methods, and the organizing process can be a very good stuff to change things and to start to be a bit more revolutionary within the union.
So there is a all right, Halliki, you want to add something, and then I'll relay some question in the chat.
Just very quick. Yeah, so of course, I think you can't expect trade union members to be any further than also just members of society, right, on the ecological crisis. And I think the big problem is, again, that we, as a society, we're also not very far on this, also due to how our media is organized and so on, and the power of business and fossil interests and so on, and also many other things. But I find it very problematic when you talk to trade union bureaucrats or organizers. Sorry, Olivier. About this issue of talking about the climate crisis and the ecological crisis together with societal crisis and so on. Very often they say that, well, we need to take our members with us, and it's not really up to us. We're a democratic institution, and we just do what our members want. And I think that's great. I think there is beauty in this long history of democratic organizing in unions, which I think some environmental movements don't appreciate, and in these structures as well. But there's also, of course, very strong hierarchies of power. And I think in general, 100 years ago, I think the unions saw their position much more as also not just directly, how do I say this, of also trying to educate members and to communicate problems much more, and not just excusing sort of inaction or lack of action on crisis by saying that, well, we need to take our members with us, because actually maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they should try to do more to go beyond the narratives that are pushed in the media, which is supported by fossil interests and so on. And I think trade unions really should, sorry, this was a long comment now, Louison, I'm really sorry. I will stop. But I think, yeah, if we go back again and we look at what unions did back then, also in enabling these wider discussions actually, and what a good life is, for example, as like limiting the place that work has in your life, as a good life as being community, as being time with your family, agency at work, all of these big discussions. I mean, trade unions have given up on many of these spaces or many of these discussions, right? And kind of conflated the good life as being about more consumption, which has been for the interest of business, right? Often going against environmental movements and so on. So I think we should be rediscovering like many of these discussions and topics which were central to trade unions.
No,
sorry for the long comment.
It's also nice to take some time to discuss those issues. We're not in a rush, but that's a good assist towards one of the questions in the chat from Oscar Wood Hansen, who asked whether a green transition is really in the interest of currently well-established unions, because they represent those employed in the currently strong industries and not necessarily people employed in new industries that will or should grow or should emerge to be at par with the transition. So here isn't it also like, isn't there also an issue with structural power, to use the word of Eric Olling, right? Like with the structural power that unions get from the very existence of those industries that would need to degrow to carry on the transition. Olivier, you want to go on this? You want to go first on this?
Yes. So I would say that, for instance, a car factory. As an ecologist, we might say we should close this car factory because it pollutes to produce cars. A union would never say that. It has an interest. On one hand, it has an interest not to say that, but I think also they wouldn't do that for altruistic reasons. We don't want to have 4,000 people unemployed who lose their job, and it's loss of income for many families, and it would be very hard from a social point of view. So that union would never say. That being said, is there a structural interest within the union not to do a transition because we represent the current sectors? I would say yes, but only on a theoretical point of view. In the practice, it's not like that. In the practice, so for instance, in the Netherlands, what happened, there was a car factory. It was on the verge to be shut down. The union gathered expertise and presented a plan to change the orientation of the factory, not to produce cars, but to produce something else with the same metal expertise. This is so a reconversion. Unions could do that in all the sectors you have to shut down. We don't do that, and it's a problem. We don't have enough expertise. We don't have enough strength. We don't have enough vision. We don't have enough young people to come and to shake the tree. I don't know. But we should do that. And there is no problem for unions to do such exercises. Moreover, if we had a more social state, and when people lose their job, they know that they will have an employment benefits, or they will have an easy access to another interesting job. This would help the transition. But now it's not the case. Now in Belgium, if you lose your job, you nearly have only interim jobs on the job market, or very, very low quality contracts. So it doesn't give you the will to risk your job by proposing alternative plans of transition within your business. But we should do that, but it's not helped, and still we should do it. So I wouldn't say there is a structural blockage. I would say the blockage is more cultural and more a lack of strength and of vision. But that could be overcome by the right person and by the right new cultures.
But so, like your example from the Netherlands is interesting, because it's actually what it says, if I understood it correctly, is that when unions actually embrace a transformative role, they can produce very interesting outcomes, and outcomes that are directly in line with the need for a social ecological transformation. There was a similar example in France, where there was a plant that was about to be shut down, and I think it was the CGT unions, CGT, who organized the workers so that they would come, the workers themselves, with a concrete proposal to like kind of transform the plant to change the production, but another production that could still use their own expertise. And to make it much more sustainable and ecological. And unfortunately, due to lack of support by public authorities, the project was not successful in the end. So here we see as well the limits of union powers. But here again, like the transformative role embraced by the union did produce some interesting experience. But what you said at the end of your remark, Olivier, about the need for enough social security, essentially to foster the transformation, links to another comment we had in the chat from Francisco Javier Ortega Colomer, who asked, what do you think about the universal basic income as a fundamental tool for the ecological transition with social justice? How long would it entail an implementation of this tool, and where can we start for? Is it like a tool that the unions embrace or agree with or think about? And how do you see it as a practitioner of ecological economics as a tool for a transition? Halliki, do you want to start? I feel your enthusiasm.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I just wanted to start with saying that I really agree with what Olivier says, and that there's we need a much bigger sort of political battle for the future that we want. And again, it's difficult because we've been losing, right, for some time. But everything is at stake here, and I think we have some political momentum now with COVID and also with Putin's war for the transformation, and we should be using that because we need a much wider social ecological transformation and the provisioning of basic social services, for example, and the reduction of working hours, division of work, and so on. And I focus on this basic provisioning or communal provisioning of social services rather than on UBI, because it tends to be better at meeting human needs in a very macro level. But I think a universal basic income in combination with services, basic services, could be a good tool, although I am not sure if I am curious as to what Olivier says about whether that would be supported by trade unions, because trade unions tend to be more focused on praising work, and there's an underlying narrative of work not being a right, and of work always being a good thing, and of people deserving something for working hard and so on. So I wonder if this would undermine this basic idea that you deserve to, you deserve higher wages because you work hard, and therefore there should be better wages for workers. So therefore, I wonder how that would clash with this idea that you deserve something, even if you're lazy. No one is lazy, but even if from this work perspective, you're not a hard worker and so on. Yeah.
The position about the basic income within the union would be the same that within the society. Some people would think unfair that people receive something if they don't contribute. Others would agree with that. So on that point, but generally unions oppose basic income, but not for these reasons. It's more for pragmatic reasons. One is that unions build the social security systems and they manage it. So we manage healthcare in Belgium. It's not directly unions, but it's structures which are close. We manage pension funds, public pension funds. We manage a lot of issues that we know that if we finance a basic income, we will take money from these points. So most propositions of basic income will take money from pensions, healthcare, or social security, and we don't want them to be reduced. That's one point. A second point is that basic income is a individual income. You receive it, then you do what you want. While with social security, it's more collective. We collectively decided that there were basic rights that we wanted to enforce, and we created systems for that. And now we would destroy these systems to give individual money. So this is a second reason why unions do not like universal basic income, and another one is that very pragmatically, if we have a basic income, in the next negotiations with the employers, they will propose a reduction of wages because we already have a revenue. And so for these reasons, it will be very bad for the way we organize. Because I give you an example. So we have a 500 euro basic income. Next week we have in the retail sector, or I don't know, in the security sector, we have a meeting with the employers. They say, here is the deal, we reduce your wages, but we keep the workers. We don't fire anyone. Due to the basic income, some workers will accept the deal. They wouldn't have accepted before, but with that, they can still manage. And so you will divide the group of workers, and then with the remaining people who still oppose the measure, you won't have enough members to organize a collective fight. And so by individualizing the welfare state, you make it far more complicated to fight against neoliberal stuff. So that's why unions oppose in nearly every country basic income, not because of it gives money to people who didn't deserve it, but more because it will reduce the collective actions. That's why.
And Halliki would also add something quickly about UBI.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, just to say also, of course, it would increase consumption by people that are already over-consuming, right? So it would be regressive from an environmental point of view. But I think I like Roldan's comment, or I think it's a private comment, but about UBI possibly also increasing the bargaining power of workers because people could afford to be unemployed. I think that would depend on how high the UBI is, right? I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Olivier.
And it depends where the money comes from. If you take this money from the people, their net purchasing power normally remains the same. And if you do the UBI only by taxing the rich, then you increase the purchasing power of people. But then you could have imagined other schemes to give them money. For instance, free healthcare, free public transports, and free other stuff. And I would prefer these stuff.
But that is linked to what Halliki said at the beginning, right? Halliki, correct me if I'm wrong, that you would rather favor like universal basic service over universal basic income. But that's so. Since we mentioned bargaining power, that's of course a huge issue because it's about power struggle and political struggle. There is a question by Roldan about what about workers as collective owners of the firms? Do you have any examples? What is the take of unions on this? And can collective ownership be a way forward to push a social ecological transformation agenda? Because that would also be a way to shift the bargaining power of workers, right? Halliki?
Sorry. Yeah. Could you just really quickly repeat the question because I missed the collective ownership of.
Yeah, the question is, what about workers as collective owners of the firms? Do you have examples? And can collective ownership be a way forward to push a social ecological transformation agenda?
Yeah, this is also something that we've been discussing for a very long time, right? About collective ownership and cooperatives. And I think there's a couple of key sort of unicorn situations where that has worked out, and then there's many situations where that hasn't worked out due to the power of corporations, for example. So we have the example of Scop Tea in France also, right, where the workers took over the tea company. But in general, I think I see the power of these worker-owned corporations more in their symbolic power and of being these parallel ways of organizing work which then show the rest of society how it can be done. But I think in general, it's very, or maybe that's too pessimistic now, but I think we need much bigger transformation, even where that is not possible, right? And there's a lot of things we can improve, even without worker ownership. But of course, it would be nice if we could have much more firms being owned as cooperatives and organized as cooperatives. But yeah, unfortunately, very difficult to organize in practice. I think that's another point where there's this huge divide between academics discussing this cooperatives as this new sustainable way of organizing business, right? And of course, it sounds great. And then there's a huge kind of space between reality and where we are and how actually business functions in this very competitive global system also. So I hope Olivier has something more positive to add.
No, I fully agree with you. So in Belgium, for instance, we had business of housewives that was self-owned by the housewives, and it worked for 20 years. So it was a nice experience. But then the market forces were strong, and the clients left the business and went with the more classical private firms with very bad working conditions. So yeah, I'd be also pessimistic with these propositions, even though it's a good stuff. But I would rather plea for sectoral changes. For instance, now at the union you have big strikes in the not strikes but demonstrations by housewives in Belgium. And I think the way forward would be to say we want a non-profit sector for housewives, rather than to have some self-owned businesses to make the whole sector non-profit. That would be, for me, the way forward. And then maybe having self-ownership after that, or in parallel. I think that would be better, because if not, you have always in the sector one or two businesses which are in advance with very motivated workers, and they can transform the businesses. But then for the millions other, you do nothing, and that's for me a big problem.
All right. So there are one more question in the chat. So we have a bit less than 10 minutes left. So and actually the question echoes something that we discussed at the beginning. So it can also be a nice way to start to wrap up. So the question is from Christoph Streisler, who comment that the lack of capacity of independent economic analysis in trade unions make them accept conventional analysis like the promise of growth in the IA. I'm not sure what is meant by IA, but of the Green Deal by the European Commission. What do you see as conditions that trade unions can begin to turn away from a growth paradigm and turn towards a fair distribution of less work? So what would be the condition to foster that change in your view? Olivier?
I can start. Yeah. We should have started with this question sooner. So
you have 6 minutes.
At the business level, union starts from the business level. So what does growth mean on the business level? Nobody knows about growth at the business level, but everybody pursues it. Why? As a worker, you want that your business doesn't close. The best guarantee is that it grows. You also want to have something to negotiate at the end of the month. So you want a minimal profit so you can have a share of it. Nobody knows about economic growth, but if you can guarantee to people that the business won't close and that they will have something to negotiate at the end of the year, you have the union men with you and the workers. But if you come to the business and you say you won't have wage increase, or you won't have anything to negotiate because there won't be any profit, there will be losses for 2 years before having a stability. You won't have any certainty about the fact that bad conjecture won't close the factory. And moreover, we will decrease your wage and you will work less. Nobody will follow you in that. As a union man, I will be fired by the workers. So I think you should speak with propositions that are aligned with what workers want. If not, you're not democratic. Or you, as a union man, everybody can say whatever he wants. But so it's very complicated to talk about reducing wages, for instance. What you could say is we keep the wages as they are, and now the next productivity gains, we will invest them in working time reduction if the workers want that. And that would be okay for the workers, probably. In our sectors, unfortunately, people tend to not to say that, but we could try. But first, I think talking about economic growth, unions don't care about economic growth. They just want certainty. No people fired, and they want to have something to negotiate. So you have to start from there. If not, you want it will be very hard to have the unions with you.
All right, so we have a bit less than 5 minutes left. So Halliki, maybe you can jump in here, and after that, we'll close the session.
Yeah, we really should have started with that question. I think it's very difficult for unions to take on this also because of their role in the treadmill of production. So yeah, so workers, of course, benefit from economic growth, and economic growth is the basis of the welfare state. And we need, again, we come back to this much broader transformation that we need, the social ecological transformation, where we still provide for welfare outside economic growth and outside the current system. But it's very hard to imagine how we get there, right? And how we, because it's just so much higher level change that is needed, that it's difficult to ask trade unions by themselves to fight for this when the livelihood of workers in the current system is very much challenged by the need for this bigger transformation, right? But I would, I would say that, again, I go back to this eco-social contract and the work of the European Trade Union Institute, also the work of the Arbeiterkammer, I think, where Christoph Streisler works. The Chamber of Labor of Vienna are also taking up this question more and more and considering this, because of course the point is that this whole machine, the treadmill of production, which continues to increase and increase and increase year in, year out, with ever faster production, ever more consumption to keep up with production, more environmental impact, this system of providing welfare, it cannot continue, right? It's a Ponzi scheme. It's an environmental Ponzi scheme that's going to crash at some point. So we need to, if we care about societal welfare, we need to change this before it crashes. And we need this much, much bigger political change for that also. And I think that's where I see the role of unions, even if they cannot always go against the interest of workers in certain places. I think we need, and we need media, for example, to take up that question, to influence society as a whole. And we do have many policies that go in that direction that could be implemented, again, if there was political kind of support for it. So we have eco-social policies, minimum maximum income corridors, for example. So inequality is a huge problem. We tackled inequality, we could provide people with a good life. We should tax labor less, tax carbon more, and so on. There's many policies that would help workers and take us towards this bigger transformative change. That's what I would say.
Sorry, I'm jumping in here because we have exactly 1 minute left now. So what would be, both of you, in like 15 seconds, your take-home message for ecological economics to improve the way ecological economics talks or could talk to labor unions and to the worker? So 15 seconds each. Who wants to start? Go ahead, because the time goes.
I can. One, think more micro level. 2, find the solution to the competitiveness problem, because unions are stuck in this competitiveness problem and ecological economists don't have any answer to that.
I would agree with
micro level of competitiveness, yes, and Halliki, please.
Yeah, and I would just add the focus on these real life welfare problems that come from the climate crisis, and also ways of providing for welfare and that gives workers security, healthcare, mobility, housing, and all these basic needs as a way in, rather than abstract ideas like degrowth or economic growth.
All right, so micro scale tackling the competitiveness issue and improving the welfare of workers. Great. We are only 16 seconds late, so that's perfect. I would like to thank you very much, Halliki and Olivier, for your participation. That was the first session of the Doing Ecological Economics seminar of the International Society for Ecological Economics. So please, if you have some ideas for future topics to be discussed, if you would like yourself to intervene on topics that you think are relevant, please write to us. Please let us know. We would be very happy to know about it. Next session will be on April 13, and it will be about ecological economics in decision making in private corporations and international climate policy. So I hope to see you all next time. Thanks again, everyone, and see you soon.